coming today. I did this presentation, I think in late November, early December, and Pam asked me to do it during the day because a lot of people don't like to come out on a dark, wintry night. So I said I would, and we had a nice presentation before this from Kay Harris on the ladies of the LAOH are celebrating their 125th anniversary, and she gave us a lot of good background history on the AOH overall. But my focus is the 60th birthday of the John A. Gildea division, which actually now is the 61st one. Because this picture was taken a year ago in January of 2019, and that's one of our late great members, Jerry Curran, who was here this night, and it was a night of reminiscing. It was kind of an informal night where we told stories about what we remember, and there was a couple charter members of this division who are still alive. In fact, they marched with us in the parades every year. Their name is Mike Ledane. I'm going to go to this map, and Michael Kane. And like a lot of Irish in Danbury, they come from this area. It's called the Luped Peninsula in County Clare. And they come from an area beyond Kilkee, lovely seashore resort town. I'll go to the next slide, because now this is a write-up that was in the 1971 journal, and I have copies of it up here. I gave a lot more out last time, and I would have printed more up on my printers on the blank, but there are some copies. And it's written by the first president of the John A. Gildea Division, J. Augustus O'Neill, who was a man who dreamed of, one of a few men who dreamed of reviving the ancient art of Hibernians in Danbury, which we had been originally, if we turn to the next slide, this is a badge. They used to give them out, the membership badge. It's from May 28th, 1873, which tells when the original Hibernian division was founded in Danbury. Now, I don't have the badge, but a woman came in to a Hibernian dance so many years ago. It was her father or grandfather's badge, and she showed it to me, and I borrowed it, and I Xeroxed it. And I had the other side, but I don't know where it is now, but at least I have that. And that side is black. They wore that to wakes. The other side, they flipped it over, it was green, and they wore it to the regular meetings. And so the first division of Hibernians was founded in 1873. And as Kay said, the Hibernians, their origin goes back into the mist of time. And they didn't keep written records. My good friend Mike McCormick, who's a national historian of the Hibernians, claims that the name AOH originated in the United States, but not in Ireland. Because some of the predecessors of the Hibernians were the Defenders, the St. Patrick's Boys, you know, and other names. And the name AOH, there's another man from Brooklyn by the name of John Ridge, who's written a history, who wrote a history of the AOH on their 150th anniversary back in 1986. It was titled Aaron's Sons in America, the story of the ancient art of Hibernians. And he searched through microfilm on all the old newspapers in New York, and he could find no mention of the words AOH, ancient art of Hibernians, until 1951. I'm sorry, 1851, 100 years early. And he could find no written record, and then it appeared, and appeared quite regularly after that. And it went by other names before that. And the legend has it originated in 1836, as Kay mentioned, in two different places. One in New York City, and the other in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, among the miners out there, which was a large contingent of Irish. So we'll go on to the next one. Now, the John A. Gildea Division is number 3. John A. Gildea, number 3 of Danbury, Connecticut. And I mentioned the ribbon was number 1. Now, there was another division that briefly, which accounts for the number 3, existed in Danbury in the late 1890s. And was called the Hibernian Rifles, or Military Division number 2. Only lasted a couple years. Now these two gentlemen here are wearing uniforms similar to the Hibernian Rifles because, well, in Danbury, these Irish-American militia companies, they kind of evolved. The first one was known as the Shield Guards, the second one was the Hibernian Rifles, and then the Irish Volunteers, which appeared in the early 1900s. And those two gentlemen there are named Gallagher. On the left is my great uncle Michael Gallagher, who I never knew. He went back to Ireland after coming out here and living through the First World War. And the man on the right is my grandfather, Peter Gallagher. And he was County Mayo, and he had a military background. He went to England as a young guy, and when the Boer War broke out in around 1899, he joined an Irish regiment in London as a young fellow. I guess he needed a job, and he was sent to South Africa. And he served in the Boer War. Never knew that till he was an old man. He went through the manual alarms with a broomstick in my dining room a long time ago.
You went through the manual what? Oh.
The manual alarms, you
manual
know,
alarms.
how they go like that. So anyway, he was quite a character, had quite a sense of humor. And I've told a few people stories of things that he would come out with, but that's not for today. We'll go to the next picture. The ladies, which Kay just talked about, they had first appeared as an organized division in Danbury. There was two divisions. It was Division 29 was formed, that's referenced on the left there, I know you can't read it, 1903. The second division, the Mary McWhorter Division, was founded in 1921. Now, I was surprised it took till 1903 to form a division, because the first of 5 state conventions that have been held in Danbury was held in 1894. And it mentions in the newspaper articles from the Danbury paper, which I have quite a collection of, that they gave a lot of ink, mentions that the women were helping the men, and they were helping with, you know, the dinners and everything, and so they were just about to form a ladies group, because it had been a ladies organization had been approved at the Hibernian National Convention in Omaha in 1894. But it took 9 years. I don't know why, but you know, it's an Irish thing, I suppose. Anyway, we'll go on to the next one. Now, the original Division 1 went defunct in the 1930s. I don't know the exact date. I found a newspaper account of their St. Patrick's celebration and meetings in 1935, and it appeared like they were still going strong. But a year later, they were defunct. And they had a big banquet in Hartford celebrating the 100th anniversary of the AOH, and it was a state banquet and the ladies from Danbury, the two divisions, sent, I don't know, 12 people up there, but no men went. They were gone by then. And the two ladies, just as an aside, their two divisions met all throughout World War II, and then sometime immediately after the war, I don't have the exact date, they merged together and took Mary McWhorter's name and number. And they kept a low profile and found very little, if any, information on them in the newspapers in the 1950s and 60s. But there was some of the men still living, and who perhaps had joined the early division, and a few of them, like J. Augustus O'Neill and Denny Miller and Danny Devine, or some names that come to mind, they had dreamed of reinitiating the Hibernians in Danbury. And in 1958, in November, as Augustus O'Neill's write-up tells us, if you read it, there was notices put in all the church bulletins in the Danbury area. And they were going to form a Hibernian division. I remember my father coming home and saying, well, I have 3 brothers. One of his friends wanted him and bring his 4 boys in to start. And my mother said, that's just going to take away from the Knights of Columbus. But it didn't happen. Eventually, most of us joined. So they started going in, and if you go to the next they met in January. The charter out there says January 8th, I believe, 1959. They met and formed a division. These two gentlemen there who marched in recent parades, Mike Kane on the right, on best mentioned, and Mike Ledane on the left, they were believed were charter members in 1959, still alive and still marching. And they say they were formed, and it said when they had this meeting at downstairs in St. Peter's Church, they came out, and Gus says in the article, they had a big surprise, because a couple of hours the meeting took. They had Irish accordion players, the big wigs from Hibernians from Bridgeport and Stamford. And when they come out, there was a ½ an inch of freezing rain on their windshields. And these guys had to drive back to Stamford and Bridgeport, but they made it. We'll go to the next one here. Now this is the first president, J. Augustus O'Neill. He was a also, he wasn't the first Hibernian of the year, he did make it, but he was the first president in 1959, and he was, sworn in, and he was very proud he was a Hibernian. He's quite a character. He says, Phil, one time, I was a member of a temperance organization. Now in Danbury and other around the state of Connecticut, prior to World War I, prior to Prohibition, the three big organizations of Catholic men were the Knights of Columbus, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and the St. Vincent de Paul Temperance Society in Danbury. And they used to have plays and everything. But I guess when Prohibition came about, it put them out of business because they didn't have any reason to continue. At least they thought so. I don't know. So anyhow, we'll go on to the next one here. Initially, the John A. Gildea division was called the Martin J. Cunningham division. Martin Cunningham was described as an obituary, he died in 1959, as the dean of the lawyers in Danbury. He had been a probate judge, and he had run for mayor of Danbury, and he finally did get elected in the late 30s, and he was probably considered to be the leading Irish American of the time. But anyhow, so they named the division after him. But it didn't stay that way. We'll go to the next one. 1959, they had their first St. Patrick's Day dance 2 months after they started, and it was held in the Aryan Hall on Crosby Street, which is a building still there. It's quite an auditorium upstairs, and the Aryan Hall was a German club. And then some of the names you can see, you might Stanley McKinney, who was served on the committee, Bob Wicksted, Francis Durkins, John Troy, who's still alive, still a member. I guess John Troy was a charter member too, who just revived his leadership, his membership not long ago. We'll go on to the next one here. Said the dance was a sellout in March of 1960, and if we go to the next slide, well, we'll go to one after, we'll come back to the communion breakfast weekend. St. Patrick's dance is, I say, we're started that first year, and they've continued ever since. And they've started putting out a program that year, 1960, as a fundraiser. It's still a big fundraiser. Putting a little commercial in, if you haven't got your ad for this year, congratulating Brian Hardy, is he back there? Brian Hardy and Colleen O'Rourke, the Lady and Men's Hibernians of the Year. This has been in existence for the last 60 years, this program, year in, year out. I haven't worked on it all 60, but it seems like that way sometimes. And just to give you a little update on the ball, initially this was the men's affair. They had it for 35 years. The men had their ball. The ladies eventually had a corned beef dinner. That was their annual event, and they were held about 2 weeks apart. Then it was usually early in March, and the ladies were afterwards. And the Lady Hibernian of the Year was not presented at the ball as it is today, but at the ladies' corned beef dinner. The first half a dozen of them, I think, because the merger where the ladies joined the men in putting on the ball in 1995, and and it was very generous of the men, because now the ladies split the profits with them. You see, very generous. So we'll go on to the next one, the communion breakfast. The communion breakfast is an event that has not been consistently held as the ball or some other events we're going to talk about. But they had a big one in 1959 in May, and Richard Venus, Dick Venus, the postmaster, late postmaster, historian in Reading, was the chairman, and that was their letterhead that went out, and it lists the presidents and the menu of the breakfast and so forth. And as I say, the breakfast has come and gone, probably due for another revival. But you notice the name at the top of the letter, the Martin J. Cunningham Division. So we'll go on to the next one here. Here's another dance. A couple of years they're in business, they're pulling 400. The first one I ever went to was at the Elks Hall, which is still up on Main Street there. 400 people. It was BYOB, bring your own bottle, setups and beer that was provided. And this has been going ever since, as it is this year. We'll go to the next one here. Now, an early leader of the Hibernians, to see him being honored as retired, I thought I'd mention him, is Danny Devine. He's being presented with 2 tickets to take his wife to Ireland for a vacation on his retirement. He was a janitor at Danbury High School, and he was well known in the area. He was a big, supposedly he and Gus O'Neill had a race to see how many members they could bring into the early years. And they, in that first year, they said they brought in at least 200 members. Danbury became the 4th largest division in the United States in just a few short years. We'll go on to the next one there. Now, John A. Gildea, that's who we're named after. I just read that. It says John A. Gildea Division is named after John Alphonsus Gildea, who was born in Danbury of Irish parents on the 3rd of August of 1887. He died on February 12, 1963 at age 75. According to his obituary, he retired in 1942 after conducting a hat store in Holyoke, Massachusetts for 25 years. He was a popular member of the AOH after it was revived in '59. He, along with others, helped to make Division III the 4th largest in the United States at the time of the '62 National Convention. John A. Gildea was described as a classy guy who related well to both old and young. At the time of his death, he was serving as state vice president. His elevation to that high office reflected how quickly the new Danbury Division had become prominent in the statewide organization. It was not a unanimous decision to name the division after so quickly changing the name. One fellow, he's passed away, Dick Shannon, who was a member, told me he argued against it. He said we'll be doing it every couple of years, changing name, but it hasn't happened since. I didn't have a picture of him, but there's his mask card. I found that somewhere. So we'll go on to the next one. One of the activities that started out right away and has continued right down to the present on St. Patrick's Day is the raising the flag. There's the late Gino Arcandi, popular mayor of Danbury in the 1970s. And they gave him a big green hat and he's marching in, I guess, City Hall or someplace. And there's, I think that's Gus O'Neill raising the flag at City Hall, and we've got a couple more pictures of that. Here's a Gene Arcandi, again, and he's presenting the key, a green key of the city to Gus O'Neill and another popular Hibernian at the time who was a division and county president, Patrick Morrissey. And they seem to be having some fun there. To the right, there's some local Hibernians. I think Peter Hardy and Jim McGivern and Carol Trester, names you don't know, but you know Pete Hardy, raising the flag. We'll go on again. I got a couple more of that. It was all over the Danbury area. There's the Brookfields Town Hall. Every place where we had a member in years past, we raised a flag. And now, like Richfield, Newtown, Brookfield, but now it's just, I think, in Danbury, Bethel, and New Fairfield. So it's time to revive it. That picture on the left, you see that guy with the trench coat? Looks like he's on the left of the picture. Do you know who that is? Huh? That's me, yeah. That's my father.
A handsome fellow.
That's my father. He's carrying a tape recorder, a portable tape recorder, with a hat and another trench coat in the background. He always played the national anthems, Irish and American national anthem, at the flag raising. And the fellow with the tan jersey and the red check pants, that's Marge Shannon's father, Bill. And we'll go on to the next one. A few of the lads at St. Patrick's Day, I can identify some of them. There's Joe McCarthy to the left. In the center with the white trench coat is Mike Kane, who I've mentioned already a couple times. And there, this is a flag of St. Patrick's Day. To the right is, with the green derby top hat, is George Hope, who was another prominent member. And next to him is Danny Ryan, who we'll talk a little bit about in a minute. So we'll go on to the next one, and again, the annual flag raising and New Fairfield Parade, which has been going since 1971. Started by the man from Cross McGlen in Ireland, Peter Hardy, who's playing the pipes there, and there's a couple tuning up with Sean, I think. And they're marching down the hill to the New Fairfield Town Hall. So we'll go on to the next one. Again, this is New Fairfield, again, the parade in New Fairfield, which ends in the flag raising. And then we'll go on to the next one here. St. Patrick's Day, 1974. You know who that is? Kevin Harity. He was not here today, but he was at the last one. That's a famous picture. I always point it out to Kevin. We'll go on to the next one here. And we've always held, whether or not there was a parade, a flag raising, snow, rain, sleet, hail, just like the post office, we always have it. And there's Pete Hardy again. Now we'll go on to the next one. Another activity that we have was from about half a dozen years or more in the late 60s and 70s was a musical program, the Musical Sounds of Ireland. And the fellow on the left started it, Ken O'Neill, who was a treasurer. He's been a Hibernian the year he passed away, I think close to 20 years ago. He started the program on WLAD, and he asked the division to appropriate money. But Ken didn't like to do any commercials, and the members started complaining, what's costing us too much money. So we went off the air. So, who was it? Dick Duchesne, Gus O'Neill, they approached me. They said, well, you're a school teacher, you should be able to do, read it. And they wanted me to do commercials. So we started doing commercials, and my friend, the late Paul Burns, who was the president, he helped me with it. Weeks that I didn't do it, he would step in and he would build. But we did take commercials on. Max Halfway, which is now Michael's.
Yeah.
We used to do commercial for a good old-fashioned Irish hospitality, stopping at Max Halfway on Lower South Street in Danbury. It's like you visit home when you stop at Max, and the menu goes all out. Then there was another guy, Ed Henry, who was a florist down on South Street. Who has a greener thumb than an Irishman? Ed Henry has the greenest thumb. So, but we did that for 6 or 7 years. But initially, we taped it in Dick Duchesne's basement. He had one of those old reel-to-reel tapes. Those with a strip, not like today. And it worked for a while. We delivered, and I would be going to New York, maybe with late wife Kitty to visit her relatives down there. And one Sunday I was riding down, and I turned on WLAD, it was WINE by that time, and because we switched stations. And I heard all this garble coming out of the radio, two programs coming out at once. And something happened to Duchesne. He taped over an existing program, and it was terrible. The guy I found, he pulled it off the radio and put on Leroy Anderson's Irish Suite by the Boston Pops to cover the time. So anyhow, we started doing them live after that, and then we did that for a number of years, and up until the mid-late 70s. And then the ownership of WNE changed hands, and they said, well, we still want you to do a program. We used to have a good time. We did it like 12:30 to 1, 1:30 to 2, but it was midday. They wanted me to do it at 7:30 in the morning. I said I wouldn't get up to listen to myself at 7:30. That ended the program. So we go on to the next slide. This was the first man, Denny Miller, Hibernian of the Year. What a nice old gentleman. His daughter is still alive. Some people might know her. She was a phys ed teacher at Danbury High School, Marie Miller. But he was a caterer. He owned a restaurant on White Street. And if we'll go to the next one, is Danny Ryan. He initiated the Hibernian of the Year award, and Denny was the first. Denny Miller was the first Hibernian. Danny became president in the early 70s. Danny had a lot of good ideas. Some people didn't think he kind of rubbed some people the wrong way, but he was a leader. He initiated stuff when he was president. But I have to tell you this one incident. Danny also did the newsletter. We used to get send out a monthly newsletter, a nice green paper, and Mrs. Clary, late Mrs. Clary down on Main Street, who had a business office, she prepared it, and the president's message, and the ladies had a page, and it was very good. It was mailed out. Well, and Denny was the sick chairman. He visited any member who was in Danbury Hospital who was sick. They were everywhere. Well, there was a member of family in town, the Oldhams. Vinnie Oldham was not a member. Vinnie was a patron of Ozzy's down Lower Street. But his brother Francis was on the Board of Education, and their mother was in the hospital. Mrs. Oldham was born in Ireland. And Denny apparently visited her because she was a member of the Lady Hibernians as well as the men. And he gave his report to Danny. And Danny put in the newsletter, not that Mrs. Oldham was in the hospital, that she was dead. So I knew Vinnie Oldham was a character. And if I stopped at Ozzy's for a beer, I know he's going to be waiting for me. So true enough, he said, I went in and he says, Gallagher, come over here. What are we going to do with all the mass cards? We had another member who ran Wixton, the Freeland's funeral parlor, Bob Wixton. And Bob, Vinny would work for his brother who ran a laundry. Vinny was delivering, you know, sheets and stuff to the funeral parlor. And he's telling me, I saw Bob Wixton this morning too. He says, I see Vinny, I see you by the Hibernian newsletter, your mother died. And Vinny says, yeah, Bob. He says, yeah, thanks. He says, we were going to give you the business, but we couldn't afford it, so we buried her in a box down behind the laundry. True story. We'll go on to the next one. Now, a couple of years ago, Julie Tracy was lining up the Hibernian of the year at our annual dance when they march in, and somebody said, well, where's Phil? They didn't put him up there. He says to him, oh, Phil wasn't Hibernian of the year. And they says, yeah. Then they showed her list. Oh, he was way back with all the dead people, she said. Because I got 1974 when I was a young guy. And that's my father, who I brought into the Hibernians. His father, he said, who I mentioned earlier, was a Hibernian, and he'd sit by the door in the early 1900s, outside the door at the meetings. But I brought him in, and he became a great member. But I had a gym athletic director in Brewster where I taught. He saw this picture in the Danbury paper, and he said it was in living blood. I think he thought I had a couple of beers or something, but that was a picture of it. Anyway, go on to the next one here, Will. Always at the ball, we had the step dancers. Started with Catherine, Catherine, what was her name from Stanford? She was I can't think of it, but she taught Iris Gray, and Iris Gray and her sister and brother always danced at the balls when they were little kids, when they grew up and had their own school. So go on to the next one here is, as we say, the Hibernian of the Year is going on every year, and there's a couple of us. Not the late, but Tom Hennessy's late to our, he's gone away from us, but he said he wanted to set the style last year. So there's a, Brian, there's a word to you. He wanted to set the style with the top hat.
The hat don't fit.
So we'll go on to the next one. And there's another Hibernian of the Year group in 217, Jay King, and there's some of his pals camming it up. I'm sure you recognize some of the faces in there. And then we go on to the next slide. Another activity that the Hibernians, the men and the women, some of us over the years have gone down to Washington every year since 1973 for the Right to Life March. That picture was taken in 1974 to the left, and that's Gene McKenna, who was still alive down in Virginia. He was Hibernian Year twice, once in Danbury and once at a division in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And to his right is Danny Ryan. That was 74. And the next year it's the late Dick Shanahan. That's my brother Steve, and Joe McCarthy, who was a Hibernian of the Year, and Kay McKenna, I think, Gene's wife, and then behind her is John Ward, who was a longtime member here. And that banner you see him carrying is still the one that's up on the wall back there. It must be good material because it's lasted a long time. We'll go on to the next one here. Another activity was started by, I think got us into it, Doug Godfrey, who was president for 1 year back in the mid-70s. And every year we've been marching that Memorial Day parade. I think that picture on the left is one of the early ones. I think that may be Dr. Reese carrying a banner on the right, and John Murphy, who passed away a couple years ago. And well, they're all there. We've been doing it ever since. This is a couple years ago, more modern one. And we'll go on. We've got a couple more pictures. Memorial Day, we always look sharp. Our banners and our county flags, and right, and then the man for all seasons, Tom Foley. He's got the pike in his right hand there, and there he is proudly carrying the Irish flag at another parade. A couple more. We still have good men, but we'll never have better. There's a lineup of men. Bob Heffernan is still alive. He's in Florida, but some of the others have passed away. And we'll go on here, marching down Main Street. It's Jack Fitzmaurice, the late Jack Fitzmaurice, leading us there, and some other people who recognize the men and the women on the right there. Okay, this I said on other occasions too. I was trying to figure out where this parade was because we're coming down White Street. It was in the mid-'80s. It was either the 300th anniversary of the city of Danbury or some other firemen's convention, either one. But we lined up out at WestCon, and there was a float in the parade as well in that one. But we always have a good turnout. Now, another activity that's been off and on over the years is the family picnics. Now, here's an interesting picture. Gene McKenna sent this up to me from Virginia. I asked him if he had any, and he sent this one picture up, and that's his son, Timmy. You know what he's trying to catch? An egg. It's the egg toss. But don't say anything, Brian. Who's that young fella in the back with his hands on his hip with no shirt on? Anybody
God,
recognize
look at the size of that chest. He's a big man. he is.
Anybody recognize him? Brian Hardy.
We never would have guessed.
No, look at that heavyweight chest.
That's Brian. Okay, we'll go on to the next one here. We used at Kenosha where we used to have 400 people at those picnics, men, women, kids, and music, games going all the time. One time we had about 6 police cars pull up because we had a Gaelic football game, and there was some black kids locally that, I don't know, they got into some kind of a confrontation, and Bill O'Keefe was there.
Morris took care of it.
Bill O'Keefe was there, and the Fitzmaurice boys, and anyhow, it ended, but it was a near miss. This is Meckauer Park where we went. I think that's Joan Finn and her late husband Bill there, sitting overlooking the pond at Meckauer. We went there for years, and then we went to the Italian Club, and then it was revived. The picnics were revived this last year, and it was held over in Newtown. It's not always a great activity. So we'll go on to the next one. The Tipperary Knights played there. This is when they were early years of getting organized. And the other activity was the annual golf tournament at Sunset Hill. This was founded by the late Paul Burns back in, he was president from 80 to 82, so we'll roughly say 1980. And it's been going on ever since, this activity. And we'll go on to the next one there. And there's Paul. Paul was a great guy. He died too young. Jet black hair. He always said, people say, Paul, you look great, he said. And he had a very kind of a funny sense of humor. He said, yeah, I'll make a good looking corpse. That was his comment. And then next to him, when Paul got tired of doing it, Leo Corkery, another great member who's passed away, he retired to North Carolina. He was a great guy. He was a financial secretary, no nonsense guy. Leo, he was a hard worker. We'll go on to the next one, and Jim Pilardi, he's kept it going, and Norm, and then finally the guy on the right talking to his father there. He's the latest chairman of that Sunset Hill Golf. You know who that is, don't you? On the right, young Pete Hardy, talking to his dad. So we'll go on, and there's Jack Fitzmaurice, but I think his son is caddying for him over at Sunset Hill. But that was a great picture. I think I had to include that one. Then afterwards, this is a good look at the Crosby Street Hall. That's the 19th hole. You recognize some of those big Bob Heffernan, Gene Fettigan, Jack Fitzmaurice. Over on the right, Dr. Reese is sitting there. But it gives you a good idea of what the hall there up at Crosby Street was actually bigger than this room. The bar was not, as you'll see. This is the guy that was, he was a president. I don't know what's happened to him, but Jim Beard, I haven't seen him in years. He was the president who came up with the idea, and he started us on the journey. We went from the Knights of Columbus, where we met in Glen Hill, to Crosby Street, to Main Street and to Lake Avenue. But the Crosby Street Hall was upstairs over the Concordia Hall, and we paid $200 a month rent, and we put a few dollars into it to improve it. It was like the attic. There was old closets up there because it was another German club, and they had a theatrical group that had used it for dressing rooms. But Jim was the one who directed us down there, and we spent a few $1,000s putting paneling on, and we'll go to the next. John Riley was the president. Eddie McInerney played a big role. He was an electrician, wired the place. One, next slide, Brendan. There's John Kane, Eddie's, who some of you remember as another electrician, did a lot of work. John wired it. Gene McKenna is in the center there. Gene did a lot of the paneling, and Jack Fitzmaurice did a lot of staining and stuff. There's others, a lot more that work, but those are ones that came to mind. And we were there, there's a couple of pictures of it. There's Joe McCarthy and John Riley and Link Hurgent and Bob Heffernan. Up there, it gives you a good idea what the hall looked like. And there's the famous bar. John Riley, to the right is Jim Beard, and is that Jim Comer? You know who the guy in the striped shirt is? Anybody recognize him? He comes in here. Nobody. You see him right here quite often. Still a member.
Lee Riley?
Lee Riley, that's it. That's Lee Riley.
Joe McCarthy?
And to the right is a piper, Bob Kane, who was a piper and active here. Says he wants to get reinstated, reactive.
Yes.
So, and there's some other scenes up there at the old Crosby Street bar. There's Gene Fettigan telling something important. He's got a captive audience there. My late wife Kitty, I think it is, telling her something important. But anyway, there's next. We'll go to the next slide. Another activity in the '70s was the Gaelic football.
Yeah, right.
And do you know who those two gentlemen are? They're those two
Put shirts back.
sunbathers on the left.
Green.
Anyone know who that is on the left?
Bill O'Keefe.
Bill O'Keefe, yeah. And on the right, you know who that is, don't you? Pete Harity.
Right.
And there's the Gaelic football team. I have another picture which included more kids, and the lads have their shirts on in that picture, but I just couldn't find it. But those are some of the early ones. I think that's Sean, third from the left, right, Sean?
The other
That's
one-
me, Phil.
Huh?
Yeah, the other one's better, the bigger one's better, yeah.
Yeah, that's Kevin up right down on the lower right.
Fitzmaurice boys.
Fitzmaurice boys, yeah.
O'Keefe.
This was taken, what, late '70s?
Yeah.
The Burks.
Late
Burks, yeah,
70s.
the Burks. Joyce.
But
Kevin
this
Joyce.
was a great activity. They go up to Springfield, Massachusetts, and over in New York State to play other youth football, Gaelic football they played.
Yeah.
Now we'll go to the next one. They also had a softball team, and there's the manager, Bob Heffernan, on the right. This picture is probably dates to the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
And behind the plate, this is out of the Stony Hill team. This was a tournament, I think a state softball tournament that Tom Egan helped to organize when I was state president, I believe. And Tom was a famous umpire in the area. And he was also later was Hibernian of the Year. And go to the next slide.
We won. We always win. We won. Trophy.
There's Jack Fitzmaurice and Bob Heffernan and Tom having a beverage after the game, and that's me on the left presenting the trophy to Gene Fettigan, who was the local president. And I think that it had to do with the softball, and Dr. Joe Reese looking on.
Yeah.
That's sometime between '85 and '89. That's when I was state president. Now, we've established a tradition here that men and women are going to the national conventions in good numbers. There's a group that was on Route 80 in Pennsylvania going out to Cleveland in 1986, I think it was. And it was quite I didn't drive there. Kitty and I and my youngest daughter Monica drove out on our own. I think they left 3 hours before us and we beat them there. But they had a lot of stops. There's Leo Corkery and Jack Lyons.
That was a good trip.
Tom Egan. And the gentleman in the center, there's a nice gentleman. He was a guard at the FCI. His name was Jim Clark. And Jim was a great man, a very courtly man. And he went to Cleveland. We couldn't find him when it came time to vote. They was worried about him because he was well up in his years. And he appears, he's dressed to the nines. He says, I've got to vote, I got to look good. He said, you have a tie on. But he was a guard in the FCI, and he used to tell me, they'd send him the Washington boys. I didn't know what he was talking about. He says the toughest kids out of the ghetto in Washington, D.C., they would give to him up in the FCI because he had a way of, handling or dealing with them. And we'll go to the next one there. And the Ethnic Cultural Fair was an activity that the women's, they ran it and the men helped them set up, but it was kind of a forerunner of the festival. And that was popular in Danbury in the 80s when they get all the different ethnic groups. And have the exhibits down at Rogers Park. And that's Bernadette McInerney, I believe, in her green shirt up in front of the booth. We'll go to the next one. Crosby Street was the scene of the birth of the Celtic Cross Pipe Band. And who's the gentleman on the left there? Somebody must know him from the pipe band. Brian.
That's Dr. Jack.
No. Who?
Oh, the guy in the law, that's Victor Matthews. I'm
Victor
sorry.
Matthews, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. They tell
He's
us
the
that.
one, I didn't realize this, but he created pipe bands in Greenwich, Fairfield, Danbury, and I think in Waterbury. He was a great teacher of the bagpipe.
That's
Yeah.
Jack Lyons in the middle.
Who?
Jack Lyons.
Jack Lyons.
Whatever you asked
And
me
Sean
about that.
Lyons.
That's his son Sean, and the one behind him, I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
Sunglasses. Anyhow, they've been going since the early 90s. They eventually moved down to the hall on Crosby Street. It was for reasons, among which was it was too small. They needed a bigger place to play the pipes and drums. They meet now, I think, at the firehouse in Mill Plain. We'll go on to the next one here. Jerry's Dream, Jerry Curran. That's a famous picture in 1995, the first year of the festival. It was taken at Rogers Park. And Jerry's a great salesman, but the lady on his right was the president of the ALOH. He needed her to put it together. Because Jerry sold the idea, but Sharon Higgins was a great organizer. And Jerry got somebody to build a replica of an Irish cottage, which lasted for years until finally, became a hazard transporting on the roads and it was falling apart. But it was that's a great picture, classic picture. And he had the dream of founding a festival, because he wanted to finance a place like we have here now. We raised some money, which eventually, raised a couple $100,000, which was in the money that we used, plus petitions from the men and women afterwards. But we'll go on to the next one. In its height, in the early part of this century, we drew these 3 years in a row close to 6,000 people, and gradually it declined. But that gives you an idea of the size of the crowds we get over at the Ives Center, and that's the Irish Great Dancers. That was a picture from the Danbury paper, but we get huge crowds there at that time. And the more people you get at a festival, the more money you make, through the admission and other things. Here's a picture I didn't have in the last presentation, but these two gentlemen, used to call them the county councilmen from Ireland, Mike Ledane and Tom Foley. And he needed them at the festival to clean up, particularly because there was so much trash afterwards. We'll go on to the next one, I guess. 9/11 was a tough year on the festival because it happened right before we were going to put the festival on, and people were canceling things, and some people said, well, we're very sad as expected and had, personal feelings, and they thought maybe we should cancel it. So we didn't. We decided to go on with it, and a lot of people thanked us because people were such at a loss, it gave people a place to go. And they wanted to be with other people. And so we did make a pledge that we would give 10% of the money we took in to the relief fund. So I'll read that. It says, Irish Aid, Monsignor Kevin Sullivan, Executive Director of the Archdiocesan Catholic Charities, accepts a check for $6,800 from Phil Gallagher and Ginny Dackenhausen, co-chairman of the Greater Danbury Irish Festival in Connecticut, and Peter Hardy and Maura Melody, presidents of the local Ancient Order of Hibernians and Ladies Ancient Order of Hibernians. The funds contributed to the Catholic Charities World Trade Center support represent a portion of the festival profits, as well as donations from vendors, entertainers, and patrons. After delivering the check, the group visited the World Trade Center site. Okay, we'll go on to the next. Another outing, it was just a 1 year that the Hibernians did a national organization, and it was chaired by my friend, another Connecticut Hibernian, Jim Gallagher from New London. He was the chairman of the fund. They ran a trip to Quebec, to an island in the St. Lawrence River. It's called Gros Isle, where they said in 1847 the famine ships were lined up 2 miles up the river, and people were dying like flies from the ship's fever, from typhus. And on that island, there was a Celtic cross over a mass grave. They say it's at least 5,000 victims of the famine that are buried there. And it's a very sad place to go. But we went there, and this is a group from Danbury that went. Got left to right, Tom Egan, myself, Lee Riley back there, Peggy Riley, John Riley, Kay Egan, Kitty Gallagher, Ed McInerney, and below is Bernadette McInerney, and, she's from Beth, she was a Sutton, her maiden name was Sutton, Tracy Wells. And 5 of the 10 are no longer with us, but that was a big Hibernian activity, and people came from all over the country. And it was a nice thing to go to. So we'll go to the next one. Food for the needy. We know we do this every year, but these were, it started out, at least from the men's standpoint, the men's activity back in the 90s. And it says Hibernian Charity Helps at Christmas. A total of 37 food boxes along with 61 turkeys were delivered to area charities at Christmas. The food was collected and distributed by the Hibernian Hall from left to right: William Berry, Paul Navaco, Ken Anderson, Peter Hardy, Thomas Foley, and Michael Kane. And the work was done at Bill Berry, who was the chairman of it, on his garage up off of Clafford Ridge. And as we can say, if we go to the next slide, we're still doing it, still in need, and the ladies and the men are doing it today. That's from a picture of a year or two ago. The need remains. So we'll go on to the next one. The St. Patrick's Day Parade in Danbury was started, or revived, I should say, about the same time the festival started. This was 1995. It's a great picture from the newspaper. There was a St. Patrick's Day Parade in Danbury back in the 1860s and 70s. But they called them processions in those days. And they marched all over Danbury and Bethel. You know, they carry a banner and hire a brass band and put the pastor of St. Peter's Church in a fancy carriage, and they march up and down the streets, you know, rain or shine. Then they take a break for lunch and they get on to Bethel, over the hill to Bethel, because, you know, from the late 1870s or into early 1900s, from St. Mary's Church in Bethel to St. Peter's Church in Danbury was predominantly all Irish families. Really, all Irish families that lived there. And what they call the Grassy Plains section, when Bethel split off from Danbury in 1855, the Grassy Plains section of Bethel stayed as part of Danbury for another 15 or 16 years until the early 1870s. And so that part of Danbury, the southeast section, was called the 4th Ward. So overwhelmingly Irish. And they say the election results never were finalized in Danbury until the results come in from the 4th Ward. Well, the Grassy Plains section of Danbury was kind of like an overflow. Bethel was an overflow from the 4th Ward. That's Mike Kane carrying the banner, and there's, what's his name, Seamus, his son. Charlie McDonald back there, I think next to me, that's Tread Lewis, the late Tread Lewis. Jim Comer, I think, is that? I'm not sure. But anyhow, it's a nice picture. And again, that banner has been, I had a lot of use from that banner. It's still not falling apart. Must be good material. Here's some other scenes from the parade. There's the 2 gentlemen I had at the beginning, Mike Kane and Mike Ledane. And they still march. Mike has gone to Florida, but I think Michael Ledane still marches with us, and Mike's well up into his 80s, and Mike Kane is in his probably early and mid 80s. Then we had the boys up in the Fairfield, again for them, I think there was 2 feet of snow 2 years ago, wet snow the day before, yet they came down the hill to the town hall. We'll go on to the next. There's always the float, some people get to ride, I think those are the musicians, the session group. And what's next? All right, the new topic. That fellow on the left, anybody recognize who he is? With the hood, I kind of isolated him.
Wayne Skelly.
Wayne Skelly, a guy I wish we saw more of around here. He's the one that directed us to Main Street. Now the story behind that is the hall up on Crosby Street worked out for a number of years. We had a lot of good times there. It was economical. But things turned sour in the late 80s and late 90s, and they quadrupled the rent. Went from 200 to 800. And that, you know, it was a tough nut to crack. And so I remember there was a member from Newtown. I don't know where he is now, Tim O'Shea. He was a carryman. And we were always talking about getting a place. And he always says, by God, he says, you'll end up back down in the basement of St. Peter's Church, he said. Well, and that's what I thought of, because we had to move out of the Concordia, and I thought of his words. But Wayne was, you know, the zoning officer in Danbury, and I says, Wayne, you know, all those empty stores down on Main Street, maybe there's something, to Sylvia, when he owned them all, that we could maybe rent something, that we could have committee meetings, and, well, that's what we did. we went down to Main Street, and we'll go to the next slide, and we had a storefront, we renovated it, and these are some of the guys. Jim Taylor and Pete Hardy, and that young fellow over on the right reminded me he did a lot of wiring down there, so he graduated at a presentation.
He's still fat.
And come on here, all these men helped out down at Main Street, played major roles. Norm and Jack Lyons and Paul Grassler Sr. Anyway, we'll go on to the next one. We held a state convention down there in 201. That scene outside St. Peter's Church. And we held a convention. We used to use the hall on Main Street to have one meeting, and the Democrats were next door, and there was a passage in. They let us use their space so we could have two meetings there. We had the events at Ollie Darcy's, and also the hotel there down the, what's the hotel down the bottom?
The Marriott.
I can't-
Marriott.
The Marin, yeah, the Marin Hotel. So we'll go on to the next, and after the parade, remember that thing, there was always a place out back after the parade to gather against the brick wall where they'd set up a kegs and everything and refreshments, and those two pipers were getting refreshed afterwards, after the parade. And they had a place to dance down there, there's the banner up there, people dancing, Kaylee dancing, and also, we'll go on to the next, people were known to sing. And one of my pals in Brewster, they were great for, they call them hits, they take old pictures and they put funny captions on them. So they had this picture of me singing, Jack back there, and can you read the caption? He says, "Oh boy, this is my fault. I thought he could sing." So that's a great, that was taken down at the old hall at Main Street. So we'll go on to the next one. Now, there's Martin and more, they were the Hibernians of the Year, but I call Martin the Hibernian of the Decade. I used to kid him that period because he was the president of the division. He took over as co-chairman of the festival, and he also was liable for the whole, when they bought this building here, his name was on the mortgage. He was solely responsible. I said, "Martin, you're the Hibernian of the Decade." And I said, but it didn't ever seem to fade, nothing phases Martin, so we'll go on to the next. Now, we went from, as we know, from from Main Street up to here. And this is the early stages. I think that's Mike George carrying putting some flooring in. But that's what it looked like. You know, we come up here, and a lot of work went into renovating it, and we're here. So we'll go on to the next slide. And who were some of the movers and shakers up here? Well, Sean Hardy, he served as division president longer than any member, 4 years. And he engaged Mike George, who was a member, as being the guy here, the carpenter, the contract, and then Joe Putnam is like more or less the general contractor. And those two guys were made Hibernians of the Year in 2010 for getting us up here to Lake Avenue. So we'll go on, and this is a place where boys became men. The Irish have a place to celebrate their heritage, and you recognize some of those faces, I'm sure.
Shane.
Kevin, Ryan, Eugene, instead Jim Pilardi. I'm not sure who's that, but this is after a golf outing.
Eugene Pilardi, myself, Shane, and Kevin Hardy.
Yeah, and who's the little fellow at the bottom?
Shane Fettigan.
Shane Fettigan.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
No, he's not.
You look 21.
He doesn't look.
He's
So we're
already
going on to the
drinking
next
beer
one
now.
here. These are some familiar faces. The chief greeter, Tommy Spooner here, who's a big supporter here, and our man that runs the bar now, Don. And we're getting close to the end here. Another familiar face,
It's good.
Yeah, huh?
clad out there, and Hibernian of the Year, he was Hibernian of the Year. Contribute a lot. Every time there was a problem here, he'd fix it. So this was the scene again back the first night of January of 2019, and there's a happy birthday to John A. Gildea, and there's we joined there last night, and Pete got up and told Gene did, and myself, and Lee Riley talked, And Jerry Kern, I was a little nervous, but he made us, I got him up to tell some stories, and he was, I'm glad he survived. And so we're up here, and now the next one, we're all one big happy face. That's it. And don't forget to get an ad or a patron in the journal. Gene.
Bill, could you say a couple of words about Dr. Reese?
Dr. Joe Reese
Joe Reese, yeah.
was he was a long time member. He was a member when I joined, but I don't know if he was a charter member. But he went to his own beat to his drummer, as they say.
Yeah.
Great guy, great. He was in fact, I had a lot to thank him because when I got Bell's palsy, I didn't know what was wrong with it, and he sent me to a neurologist. He wasn't even practicing anymore, which determined it was Lyme disease. But he was a great guy. But he was funny. He'd buy all the raffle tickets, and then he'd win. He was the lucky one. Well, he bought $100 worth of tickets, so he'd always win.
Long meetings too.
Yeah, long meetings.
Long meetings.
And when we did, he was not known for his speed. When he was president, I went into Mrs. Clary's one time. She did the newsletter. And she said, I don't know what I'm going to do with that man. I said, why? He sent me a presence report, ran 7 pages.
Oh my God.
The newsletter was only 2.5 pages. But he had a heart of gold, and he was a great guy.
Yes, yes.
I don't know, anybody else, any questions? Or,
Thank you.
Bill, thank you very much.
okay.
Good job, Bill.
And I don't know